Hello Internet, Demajen here with another Metroidvania map, video, but not about a specific map really. This is my Metroidvania mapping year in review. It's an ego-stroking video where I offer commentary on all the Metroidvania games that I played and mapped this year. There were a couple that I played that I didn't make maps for. This is purely about the ones that I did make maps for, and there were a lot of them. So I would recommend, unless you're like super interested in my thoughts on games that you haven't played, if you are interested in my thoughts on a particular game, you can check the chapters / timestamps or whatever we're supposed to call them these days in the description below to skip to or find the specific games that you might be interested in. This is a no holds barred commentary video. Every game will have my general or very specific thoughts on the game itself and anything that stood out to me, as well as my kind of general thoughts on actually making a map for the game. If you find any value in my maps and would like to support what I do, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, ring the bell to get notified when new videos go live, or you can maybe head over to my coffee.com page and see if a donation or a shop purchase is more to your liking. There is no pressure here. I always appreciate when people send me money or buy stuff from my shop, or even just like and comment on my video. If by the end of this video, or maybe when you get to a certain bit in this video, you find that you like it, a like would also be very appreciated. But I'm not really a fan of telling people to, like the video before you've watched it, because that's not how I do things when I watch videos. I like it at the end if I've enjoyed it, not, like it at the start, just in case you like it. It might be better for the algorithm, but I don't make any money on YouTube anyway. So, a couple of final reminders. Number one, this video is 100% personal opinion. This is all from the perspective of me. What I like, what I find good design to be, what I think makes the Metroidvania genre excel. And, as I discovered in the comments for my tier list video a few months ago, my opinion on what makes a good Metroidvania isn't necessarily the same as a lot of people's. It certainly doesn't always match what the Metroidvania subreddit says, which is one of the reasons why I tend not to go near the Metroidvania subreddits. Purists versus fans and fanatics versus me. I do not class or count myself as a fan of the Metroidvania genre, because I find that fandom these days has a certain set of connotations and stereotypes and cliches attached to it, and I just don't want to be part of that. I like what I like, and sometimes I like things that other people don't. Final note, number two, before we hop into the fairly exhaustive list of games, because I'd rather this video not be over an hour and a quarter long like the rambling, barely scripted version that I put out last year. Almost all of the gameplay footage shown in this video is captured recently, as in I had to reinstall the game over the last week or so and just played about a bit. It is not me playing the game when I mapped it out. It is not endgame skilled gameplay. I've forgotten how to play 75-80% of the games on this list. It's just there to show you what the game looks like and provide you with something to look at. It's not there to show you skillful gameplay, which, to be fair, you probably wouldn't get from me even if it was a game that I'd played today and had got a platinum trophy in, because I'm just not very good at video games. Let us begin the year. We're starting off in February 2023, 14th of February actually, with Angel's Gear. A short and, I can't exactly say sweet considering the general disturbing visuals, etc. of the game, but you get the idea. It's a game with some really interesting concepts and a pretty decent setup, but arguably was not quite substantial enough to really do much with them. You can see from the map that it's not a massive game, but it is indie, made by, I believe, one, maybe two people. I think one. It was a simple game to map because it's only got half a dozen bosses and areas to explore. It didn't leave much of an impression on me, but again, it's been a long year and I've mapped a lot of games and played a lot of other games this year. So the fact that I can't really remember it shouldn't be seen as a critique of the game itself. And actually, when I reinstalled it to get the footage to, put behind my words for this, I actually reminded myself of the setup of the game because my save file had gone somewhere, God knows where. And the actual setup and premise for the game is pretty cool. I'd forgotten how interesting I found it at the time. And considering I just finished playing all of Dead Space, like all of Dead Space 1, Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3, Dead Space 2023, my head was pretty full of Dead Space, and Angel's Gear was a different change of pace from that, and yet arguably also fit quite well thematically in terms of the horror stuff. So yeah, Angel's Gear was an interesting one. Not massively memorable for somebody that plays as many games as I do, but visually and hourly interesting. I recommend you check that one out. It's not very expensive, and if you like horror and Metroidvanias, you might find something in it. A couple of days after Angel's Gear was Elderand on the 16th of February. Elderand reminded me a lot of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. In fact, as I was playing, it really felt a lot like Symphony of the Night. I hadn't played Symphony of the Night in a while, but there was just something about the general feel of it, something about how the character controls the speed of movements. Something that just felt so very, very familiar about the feel of Elderand straight off the bat. Elderand's a very traditional Metroidvania. It's got a very traditional grid-based map. But what sets it apart for me was the general tone and theme. It started off a little bit basic, but you quickly started to figure out that there were some darker themes and tones going on. There was a surprising amount of bloody stuff going on not too far into the game, which gave it a bit more of a horror or even cosmic horror in places edge that most games in the genre don't touch on. Cosmic horror is very, very difficult to do in video games because, of course, it's all based around the unknowable and the unexplainable. And as soon as you break that down into polygons or pixels, it loses some of that effect. But I enjoyed what time I spent with Elderand, and it was a reasonably substantial adventure. It was also a fairly easy game to map out, with only a couple of areas on the map that I'm not going to say had me stumped, but left me having to figure some things out and go a different route before things clicked into place, which didn't take a huge amount of time, but was just enough to get me thinking about, I'm stuck here. Where do I need to go? What do I need to do? And it is still a game that I get a handful of questions about. Well, how do I get through specific barriers? So clearly the game was doing something right in the sense that, yeah, there was a little bit of a difficulty bump, a little bit of a roadblock for people. And puzzles in Metroidvania games, they don't always work well, but when they do, and you suddenly realise what you had to do, there's that feeling of, yeah, satisfaction. Because Elderand was one of the earliest games I played this year, my very detailed memories of Elderand have faded, but I do remember enjoying the experience, and as you've probably seen from the footage in the background, really couldn't remember how to play, but there were an interesting variety of visual areas to explore. I recommend Elderand. Next up for the year was 9 Years of Shadow, which came out in March, towards the end of March, actually. 9 Years of Shadow is a game with a beautiful soundtrack, in my opinion, and some nice story-based ideas, with a grid-based map that doesn't stray particularly far from its Symphony of the Night roots. It's also probably one of the first instances of Demajen maps something barely anyone will use, with me rather time-consumingly and accurately mapping out the green serpent hole thingies that you can use to get around certain sections of the map. 9 Years of Shadow is a game that has met with very mixed opinion. For some people, it is like Symphony of the Night, and they like it because of that. For some people, it's a little bit too basic, even in comparison to Symphony of the Night, and doesn't have enough variety of enemies or exploration or ways to get around, and therefore they don't like it because of that. I am, I must confess, quite ambivalent towards the game. I like certain things on some days and I don't like them on other days. It's an odd one. I enjoyed my playtime with it, but I've never really felt the urge to go back to it, and yet when the developers announced and ran a Kickstarter recently for their next Metroidvania games, I backed it straight away. So I believe that the devs know enough about the genre and have now got more experience under their belt and can create a better game next time. Not that this one wasn't good. It was, as I said, all right. But I feel like they could do more with more experience. 9 Years of Shadow was also actually one of my most popular maps in the early part of the year. It was generally a good time as well to put together, even if the game wasn't very long. I really enjoyed seeing the connections for the map as I was putting it together. And that's good because when I played the demo for the game, there was no map in it and it was getting very close to release. And I suspected at the time that the map system actually wasn't going to be very good because of that. But actually, I think probably what it was that they just didn't want to redo the map logic for a demo. And therefore, they just didn't include the system at all. I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing what the studio does for their next game. Following reasonably hot on the heels of 9 Years of Shadows, Curse of the Sea Rats came out on the 6th of April. This was another game that I backed on Kickstarter, and I played a couple of demos, I believe, of Curse of the Sea Rats, and something felt off. And that thing continued to feel off into the full game. It was one of those games that I really wanted to love thanks to one very specific thing, but it actually turned out to be a detriment to the game. That was the wonderful kind of hand-animated cartoon vibes of it. I am of the generation, because I'm old, of people that would watch hand-animated cartoons on a Saturday morning. You know, He-Man, Mask, Jason the Wheel Warriors, and so on and so forth. I'm an 80s kid. I was born in the early 80s. But hand animation, for all of its looks, doesn't necessarily help when it comes to making a good game in terms of feel. Because if you are so proud of your hand animations that you want to make sure that they are, that they play out properly, animation locking in a fast-paced platformer doesn't necessarily work very well. But I'm not going to go into any more detail on my critiques of Curse of the Sea Rats, as my major criticisms of the game have actually now been fixed and or changed. So the animation locking is gone. You can get out of, you can dash out of, you can evade out of all of the attack animations, which means that it is now a much more fluid combat experience. It's got a solid grid-based map that's got some fun exploration, it's got some colourful NPCs, and it does have that Saturday morning cartoon storytelling vibe. I enjoyed putting together the map and adding as much detail to it actually as I could, because the game features some very, very nice artwork for basically everything, and I was able to, pull that from the files to add to the map. And the patches have made the game a better and more complete experience. I would not have recommended the game at launch. And in fact, several people asked me whether it was any good, and I said, not quite now. But now, in December of 2023, I would say that Curse of the Sea Rats is worth your time, especially if you are going to play it with someone younger. So if you are going to play it with your kids, for example, it has a co-op mode. I think it actually goes up to 4-player co-op. You can play it with your kids or your friends, and for some people, that's great. It's not my cup of tea, but if you want a Metroidvania game that you can play with somebody else, there's nothing that requires co-op in it. There's no puzzles that require 2 or more people working together. It's not that kind of game, but you can play it with your kids or whatever and enjoy it as that kind of Saturday morning cartoon experience. Lone Fungus came out of early access on the 7th of April, the day after Curse of the Sea Rats, and I did not release my map for Lone Fungus on its release day. In fact, I believe I released it earlier than that, because I started mapping Lone Fungus long before the launch date. I had been looking forward to it for quite some time, but I was really wary of the burnout that I felt with Haak. I spent a lot of time playing and replaying and replaying and remapping Haak, and I didn't want to do that with Lone Fungus, because actually Lone Fungus is quite a big game. So whilst I started mapping it before its launch out of early access, I didn't do too much on it until much closer to launch. Lone Fungus is a big game, and whilst it's not graphically outstanding, it's got a lot of charm, and it has got really tight gameplay to make up for it. Tight, and in fact, some incredible movement tech that I was never quite able to master in my journey to 100%. But fortunately, I had access to the debug mode in early access. Since the first versions of the map came out, Basti, the developers, made multiple updates to places of items, as well as ways of detecting secrets in the game. So, realistically, my version of the map isn't as useful as it might once have been, but it's there should people want it. The game's also got a very dedicated and very devout following on Discord. So, if you are looking for more detailed help with this, I'm going to call it Hollow Knight but with mushrooms style adventure, the Discord is actually a really good stopping point to ask for help. I realistically am not a good person to ask for help with Lone Fungus. I played a chunk of it. I haven't been back to it in months. And as I said, the movement tech it's very good if you are very good with movement tech. I am not. But a good game. Good game, and I know Basti's working on Lone Fungus 2. So looking forward to seeing where that goes. Afterimage, 24th of April. This is the big one in multiple ways. Not only is it the biggest Metroidvania I've played in terms of sheer map size, beating out even Aeterna Noctis, but it's also the one that took me the longest time to put together. I've spent around 75 hours now on guides, infographics, and maps for Afterimage, and the game's literally just this month released another free content update, which I really hope hasn't invalidated everything, but I've not had time to look at it for reasons that will become obvious towards the end of this review of the year. I loved Afterimage. It's got great exploration, it's got an excellent visual style. The developers were very responsive at getting the game up to speed after meeting player expectations based on the demo. But most of all for me, it was a game that just kept giving. It was fun to move around, and every time I thought I was getting close to the end of the game, new areas kept opening up before me. And unlike Aeterna Noctis, which did much the same thing, Afterimage never felt like a chore to me. But there have been some critiques leveled against the game. It is perhaps a little bit too free and open. When the game first launched, each of the zones in the game had got a level range attached to them on the map. You could see roughly what level everything in that zone was going to be. And for some reason, the devs removed it. I can't remember the reason why. I know there was a reason why, and I know it was something to do with things that players said, but I can't remember what it was, because that was April and this is December. But they removed it. I actually put those back in on my map because a lot of the critique that I've seen against Afterimage is that it's really easy to get yourself off the beaten path and to find yourself in an area that is much too high level for you, because there is a leveling system in the game. So it was an odd choice. I don't really remember or understand why they removed it, because I can see why that would be a massive issue for people. The game never felt like a chore for me, and neither did mapping it out. Mapping it out was a job, arguably a full-time job. At over 320 copies sold, it's my most purchased map. And considering that I released 3 versions of all of the area maps for Afterimage, the fact that it sold so many copies, and I've received so many messages from people, so grateful that I put these together. I really appreciate all those messages, because as I said, it was a job. It was a big job. So clearly I was doing something right with Afterimage, because the devs did something right. They created a game that people enjoyed exploring and they wanted to find everything in, and sometimes that balance isn't always easy to hit in a Metroidvania. You've got to want to find all the things, to explore all the nooks and crannies of the map. Not everybody does that. You know, some people will find the critical path through a Metroidvania game. They will follow the critical path, they'll miss out a load of stuff, and they'll get the end and they might be satisfied, but that'll do them. And I think Blasphemous, the original Blasphemous, was potentially a game that worked in that way, because so much of Blasphemous, the Metroidvania elements of Blasphemous, you could just miss or ignore, and therefore you didn't really feel like you needed them. Whereas in Afterimage, you do kind of want to explore a bit to make yourself more powerful, to get your character more levels, and therefore to enable you to meet some of the game's challenges a little bit easier. I'm not doing a Metroidvania of the year. In fact, I'm not doing any awards this year, really. Probably. I don't think I am. I have no current plans to, and as I said, considering it's the 27th of December as I record this, I'm out of time probably anyway. But if I was to offer an award for game that kept me the most occupied making guides, yeah, that's Afterimage. Very, very clearly and easily Afterimage. It's a Soulsvania, so it's not going to be... Well, no, it's not a Soulsvania. It's a Metroidvania with some Souls-like elements. It's definitely not going to be for everybody. The difficulty curve is a little bit iffy in places, but it's massive. It's great value for money. The visuals and the music are great. The translation is mostly okay. The story is mostly okay told. The map itself was great fun to put together, and the developers really clearly knew what they were doing with the size of the world and the flow of things and so on and so forth. So I highly recommend Afterimage. The Last Case of Benedict Fox released all of 3 days after Afterimage, and I really wanted it to be good. I really wanted to love it. Ever since I saw the trailers, it was like, Lovecraftian puzzle-based Metroidvania. Yes, please. And I do love lots of it. I really love the 2D visuals, sorry, the 2.5D visuals. I really like the world. I love the exploration and the kind of heavier than normal puzzle focus of Benedict Fox. It was all right up my alley. But when I played it, the combat was, I don't want to say bad, but it wasn't good. It was iffy. I like the word iffy. Let's go with iffy. Yeah, the combat was really iffy. Now, the game's had a couple of patches since then to try and fix up the combat, to fix some of the issues. Some of the issues that I gave feedback over. But I told myself that I wouldn't go back to Benedict Fox this year. And I haven't. I haven't seen whether those changes have fixed the issues that I've had with the game. I'm going to go back to it in 2024. I'm going to give them a year, essentially. I'm sure there was supposed to be some extra content or DLC, but I don't know if that's actually happened or is happening. It's been quite quiet. Maybe they've been doing console ports. I don't know. But yeah, I am going to go back to The Last Case of Benedict Fox because, as I said, I really wanted to love it. I just didn't when I first played it at the end of April. I'm hoping that if it's a game that you fancy trying and you pick it up now, I'm hoping it is a much better experience than what I had. But this is a video about maps, and in terms of mapping, Benedict Fox was great fun. For a start, the in-game map is a work of pure art. It goes beyond the kind of detailed room style of map that you get in something like Hollow Knight to something that is actually, it's just good to look at. It's a beautiful map, and you can see a lot of the bits and pieces that you're going to need to work around. They're just there. You don't need to try and remember, oh, what was in that room? You can see it based on the map. It's much more functional than something like Hollow Knight or Afterimages was. The amount of character and the detail in Benedict Fox's map is brilliant. But it still needed, actually, a fair amount of work to create a map guide for, because the game is, as I said, puzzle heavy. And a lot of the puzzles used a particular alphabet and a particular script, and I had to try and find fonts or some other way of even just getting those symbols onto the map in a way that was clear and that made sense to people without just covering big swathes of the map in text. I think I mostly hit a decent balance with annotating those puzzles. I've heard no complaints, but equally not many people have used it. I think because of the very nature of the game being something that a lot of people found puzzles and wanted to figure them out. I think a lot of people wanted to figure out the map for themselves as well, so they didn't necessarily need mine, and that's absolutely fine. I really, really wanted to love Benedict Fox. Instead, I liked it. It was all right. But it felt like it could have been something, and maybe by now it already is something that is really good and fun to play in all aspects. I do wonder if they fixed up the conclusion to the story though, because I thought the pacing of that was a bit off. Maybe I'll find out in 2024. On the same day that The Last Case of Benedict Fox came out, the Ramsey also came out. The Ramsey is a charming mini Metroidvania. It's got a simple grid-based map. It's got a lot of charm and character, and I was actually really surprised by it because it wasn't advertised as a Metroidvania game, but it clearly is. I played a demo of it for a Next Fest and kept my eye on it, and to the best of my knowledge, now I must admit I haven't been and checked, I still don't think it's tagged as Metroidvania, but it is one. It's got a reasonable sized game world broken up in much the same way as the kind of early Shantae games done, Pirate's Curse especially, where each of the places that you go to is a different island. This one's got a little bit more of a puzzle focus, thanks to its cotton gun, which you can use to bounce off things and create platforms with. It's short and it's charming, and mapping the game was very straightforward. There were some simple fetch quests to annotate and doors to link up and water to put in, but it didn't take very long. But it was short and it was fun, and I really liked it. I really liked it. Is it going to blow anybody's socks off? No, not at all. Is it maybe a bit expensive for what you get? Possibly. I don't know what the cost currently is. But I had a good time with the Ramsey. On the 22nd of May 2023, Aeterna Noctis released the Pit of the Damned DLC expansion thing. I've made my thoughts on Aeterna Noctis fairly clear. In the past, I've even mentioned it in this video. It's a pretty game with an okay story, but bloated level design and inconsistent difficulty and precision platforming mechanics without precision platforming controls. A lot of people love Aeterna Noctis, and they will look down on you if you say you don't like it. And this is one of the reasons why I tend to be quite outspoken about it. It's one of the reasons why I have to constantly talk about how it's not a Hollow Knight beta unless you are a very specific type of player, but everybody who loves this game thinks that their opinion is adamantly objectively correct, and you really, if that is you, need to go and look up what the word objectively means, because so many people say it is objectively the best Metroidvania game out there, and that's not how the word objectively works. But anyway, the Pit of the Damned DLC was memorable for me for literally one reason. It was bugged, and I couldn't finish it for several days until the devs patched it. That's the only thing that I can remember about it. There were 2 fairly decent sized areas. There were a couple of bosses. They added easy anti-cheat because they introduced some leaderboard system that literally nobody asked for. It didn't do anything new. It didn't do anything well enough. I'm certainly not raving about it in the positive way that some people seem to. I just didn't care. I didn't care enough about Aeterna Noctis. All of the goodwill that I got from the vaguely interesting characters at the start of the first kind of version of Aeterna Noctis was quickly evaporated by about mid-game, where I realised that I just wasn't having fun getting around this world. And the Pit of the Damned DLC has done absolutely nothing to change that. If you love Aeterna Noctis, more power to you. More power to you. But it ain't for me. A game that surprisingly was for me was Convergence, a League of Legends story, which came out the day after the Pit of the Damned DLC, and actually I focused on first. Convergence was a surprise for me for several reasons. Whilst not the longest game and arguably a smidged overpriced, I still had a lot of fun with it. I don't know basically anything about League of Legends. In fact, all I know about League of Legends is from the Arcane TV show, which I loved, and that features Echo. So I at least know that he's supposed to be time power related. And that integrates actually really well into the Metroidvania design. It doesn't do anything massively innovative in that regard. It's very kind of Prince of Persia Sands of Time in terms of how the time powers are used. But they actually fit quite well into the Metroidvania space. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the new Prince of Persia game does. The Lost Crown, is it? Which is out a couple of weeks into January, just before my birthday, handily, on the 21st. Convergence, definitely not for everybody. But for me, it very much scratched an itch, and it was a lot of fun to map, which, again, is not something that a lot of people get benefits for. You know, a lot of the cheaper, or the a lot of the shorter Metroidvanias, a lot of people say, well, you know, I don't get a lot of time out of them, so they're not necessarily good value for money. But I don't have that problem, because even if they are shorter games, I still usually end up probably doubling the amount of time value I get out of them, because I enjoy making the maps for them too. Mapping Convergence very much scratched an itch, and I ended up putting a chunk more detail onto the map than I would normally have done, just because I enjoyed doing so much. And I found out later that changing or increasing the difficulty switches and changes up the amount of obstacles and help that you get on the levels while keeping the core elements the same. I only played on the easy mode because I was just expecting a fun romp. I didn't want something super puzzly at the time, but it's pretty darn cool that the amount of help that you get and the obstacles change up. I think that's really cool design, and I highly recommend Convergence if you can pick it up on sale. I think it is a good blast. It's got some good character moments, it's got a decent story, it's got a nice looking map, It's got some decent enough challenges even on the easy mode. I didn't try it on the hardest difficulty. I imagine the platforming can get reasonably tricky at that point. But yeah, give that one a shot for yourself if you can find it on a sale. Another game that I had a really super good time mapping this year was Doomblade. Again, not a super duper long game, but moving around the map felt very different to a lot of other Metroidvanias that I've played, and the collection aspect of the game felt pretty well paced, apart from a couple of really sneaky heart pieces and the gloom souls you need to collect at the end of the game. I liked the plots, I liked the visuals, and I liked the somewhat unique movement system of Doomblade, and I do recommend playing it with a keyboard and mouse, which I don't normally say for Metroidvanias, but I just found I got a little bit more control with keyboard and mouse, though the developers have patched some stuff up as well since I played it. Fleshing out and filling out the map for Doomblade was mostly straightforward until right at the end, where you have to collect some gloom souls. I can't remember how many of them there are. I think there's 7. You've got to collect all of them before you can really properly get the full ending of the game. And when I played it, you got absolutely no idea, no indication whatsoever of where they actually went. They flew out from a central location all the way around the map. You had no way of telling where they were. I obviously found them all, put them on my map, but gave feedback that maybe it'd be nice if actually there was an indicator in game of where they went to, and that has been patched in, as well as some quality of life. Until that point, I actually spent a chunk of time working with a couple of people on the Discord to find the last couple of heart pieces, find the gloom souls, and so on and forth. It's all been patched. The quality of life has gone through. It's much better. For most of the people playing the game now, I suspect it's a better experience. Not that it was bad to start with, it was just a little bit in need of tweaks towards the end. The map itself, really well put together, thought out, plentiful things to find, and I did quite like moving around it with the game's somewhat unique movement system, especially the fast travel system. It was a good indie romp with a pretty fun story, a bit of cheeky humour to boot. We move into June the 20th. Moonscars. Moonscars didn't release in 2023. But they released patch 1.6 of Moonscars in 2023 to basically update things for a big content patch. And I had to play the game through again from the start to check out the changes. And most of them were just little tweaks. But fortunately, I really like Moonscars, so I didn't mind. I did end up adding a few extra notes to my map. I replaced a load of icons to update them because I had the opportunity to. It wasn't a massive overhaul for me, as I'd already included map markers for things that the devs added map markers for in this patch. But I still recommend and continue to enjoy Moonscars. I like the animation, I like the feel, I like the tone, I like the slightly obscure narrative. It scratches a certain itch for me in terms of almost Souls-like style storytelling. I know it's not for everybody, and I still kind of miss the slightly more artistic version of the map that the game first launched with, but I can't deny that it is an easier to read map now than it was when the game first launched. Still recommend Moonscars. Not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because, as I said, it didn't release in this year. A game that did release, kind of, this year was Oirbo, which on the 19th of July launched into early access. And I put together a little map for Oirbo back in July, but that is already very, very out of date. And just like I've already talked about with the Haak early access burnouts, I'm not going to spend a lot of time mapping and remapping Oirbo because it has a tendency to ruin my enjoyment of the game. The map's pretty basic, but it's fairly fun to explore, but the game itself is not going to be for everybody. I've spoken before about my 3 pillars of Metroidvania design: good combat, good areas to explore, and good methods of getting around those areas that also have options in combat. The problem that I have with Oirbo is that I really like the exploration. The abilities that we get to move around are cool, but the combat is Mario. It is jump on enemy heads, and I don't find that very engaging. There is nothing wrong if you do find that fun gameplay, and I don't take any umbrage whatsoever at not being the target audience for a particular game. If I'm not the target audience for a game, it's like, okay, I'm not the target audience for this game, and I can choose whether to play it anyway or to not play it anyway. And I don't think that I am the target audience for Oirbo, because the combat is too simplistic for me, and that is fine. I will probably still have fun with the exploration aspects of it, but 1/3 of the 3 pillars isn't working for me. We'll see if anything gets changed in that, but I've been given the impression that that's what they are sticking with, and that's fine. I will put more work into Oirbo's mapping closer to the release date, whenever that is going to be. End of July! Over halfway through the year, isn't it? It's July, because it's the 7th month of the year. Xanthiom Zero, a fun indie Metroid-like made in Game Maker Studio 2 that is at some point getting a sequel. Can't remember the exact date, but coming up in 2024, I believe. The in-game map is pretty simple, it's straightforward, but because it's made in Game Maker Studio 2, I could use the Undertale tools to actually just pull out the entire game world, because it's made up of a few rooms all laid out. I had to do some tweaking to faff around with different layers to take off, collision box indicators and stuff like that. But rather than just doing a grid version of the map like there is in game, I actually put together a big composite map for Xanthiom Zero, which looks pretty cool. And it looks pretty cool because the game itself looks pretty cool, and it uses the in-game graphics. The dev did a great job at doing the pixel art, doing the layouts, and populating the world with some really cool stuff. Xanthiom Zero's got a lot of weapons, it's got a lot of upgrades to find. Getting 100% actually took a reasonable chunk of time. It's fun, it's cheap. I really recommend it if you like me, really like the Metroid side of the Metroidvania genre, and are often sad that so many Metroidvanias focus on melee. One of the reasons why I like the oft-criticised Mummy Demastered is because it's range-based. It's guns, it's shooty. And whilst I don't like guns and shooty IRL, in my Metroidvania games, I actually like that change of pace, just because how many of the games that I like are quite often melee-focused Soulsvanias. That change of pace really works for me, and Xanthiom Zero really worked for me. The map is good, the game is good, and as I said, it's fun, it's cheap. I recommend. Looking forward to Xanthiom Zero too. August brought out a couple of big guns. I can't actually remember whenabouts in August I released the first map, but it was for the Crowsworn backer demo. So if you backed Crowsworn on Kickstarter, you had access to the backer demo. And it's a bit of an odd one, this, because it's one of the only times I've done a map for a demo. I did one for Afterimage, actually, as it turns out, but I did one for Crowsworn as well, because Crowsworn's a pretty significant game in the kind of general genre. It was a massive Kickstarter success, was Crowsworn, and it fills that kind of Hollow Knight shaped niche, while still, in my opinion, retaining plenty of its own identity, something that sadly a lot of very online people don't seem to be able to see. They see the hand-drawn art and they're basically, oh, it's a Hollow Knight clone. Tangent! And you can feel free to disagree with me about this down in the comments, but the success of Hollow Knight has, for me, ruined the Metroidvania space for so many indie games, and it massively irritates me how everybody expects every indie game to now be Hollow Knight. The joke's on them, of course, right now, because Silksong was announced, 4 years ago at this point, and still isn't out. It's like games like Hollow Knight take a long time to make, and most indie games don't have the massive Kickstarter backing that Hollow Knight did. And I know this because I was one of the people that backed it. So if you're expecting massive Hollow Knight style games from every Metroidvania, you are setting yourself up for disappointment. Stop putting it up on a pedestal. It is a great game, but it's not the only great Metroidvania. And just so something looks a bit like it doesn't mean it's a clone. Anyway, Crowsworn. The backer demo was a specially created vertical slice of the full Crowsworn experience. It's not a part of the actual game. It was a specifically created demo area using some assets from the actual game, but clearly not a level or an area. And I loved it. I really enjoyed exploring everything it had to offer. The exploration, the mechanics, the enemies, the bosses. The map didn't take a huge amount of time to put together, but I really enjoyed doing so. And it gave me a certain set of expectations, or at least some kind of idea about what the full game might look like several months down the road. I don't expect it to look hugely like the demo map, but it gave me an idea about, you know, the kind of things the team is capable of doing. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the actual game presents. I don't know whether this is going to come out before they manage to drop Silksong, because we've still got no release date for when Silksong's coming out. Crowsworn could get there first, I'll have to say. But a game that did definitely come out in August, 24th of August 2023, was Blasphemous 2. From a demo that I didn't really need to map out to one of my favourite mapping experiences of the year, Blasphemous 2 for me, but clearly not for everybody, improved on the original game in every way. Gone are the internet spikes, gone are the dodgy platform controls, gone is the fact that 75% of the actual Metroidvania part of the game was optional, like in Blasphemous 1. Now we've got a proper Metroidvania experience with Blasphemous 2. Better graphics, smoother platforming, altogether a better feel. And lots of people on the internet, very vocal people on the internet, disagree with me on this, and that's fine. If you prefer the original Blasphemous, it's still there. You can go back and play it. The map of Blasphemous 2 was an incremental improvement on the first game, with far more interesting blockers that needed to be bypassed. You needed to find the abilities, the locks and keys mechanism to get around itself. The in-game map is still as kind of bare bones as the first game, but the style of it was on point enough that I actually stole it to remake and make for the first time a few more maps this year. I remade the original Blasphemous map with the Blasphemous 2 stuff just because I really liked it. I loved Blasphemous 2 enough to buy it twice. I bought it on the PlayStation 5 and the PC. Well worth it for the time and enjoyment that I got from both the games and the mapping of it. And just because I love being contrarian and controversial, I really liked the new cutscenes. I really liked them. I thought they were very, very well done. They really helped complement the experience for me. The upgraded, slightly more colourful nature of the world. I really like the new cutscenes, and I hope they keep them around for the next game. And I've put this in here just because I know there's a lot of people that really didn't like them and were unjustifiably rude to the developers for the change. If you were one of those people, it's a video game. Shame on you. There was a bit of a lull in the genre after Blasphemous 2, and I found myself towards the start of December in need of distraction. Obviously, as a school teacher, school starts in September, and it's not always an easy start to the year. And it hasn't been an easy start to the year pretty much every year since the COVID lockdowns. So naturally, I threw myself into mapping because I'm the kind of person that likes to hyperfixate on things to distract myself. I don't tend to admit that to people, but it's now on record in a video, assuming I haven't cut this bit out. Bloodstained. Ritual of the Night. I released a map for on the 7th of September. I played Bloodstained several times already, and I'd never mapped it. I never mapped it actually because I don't like the in-game map at all. I really dislike Bloodstained's in-game map. I know what it's going for. As the kind of spiritual successor to Symphony of the Night, it's going for the exact same style as Symphony of the Night, but with one obvious flaw. Symphony of the Night was designed for 4x3 shaped rooms. It was designed for the fairly kind of squarish, blocky grid-based rooms, and Bloodstained was designed for 16:9 widescreen. And for me, the stretched room shapes did the map no favours. It made it look really weird, really horizontal and skewed in comparison to the cleaner looks of games like Symphony of the Night, Super Metroid, and of course, Blasphemous 2, which I just finished playing. One of my biggest supporters on my Coffee.com store, and arguably one of my biggest supporters in general, a massive fan of the Metroidvania genre, asked me if I'd made a map for Bloodstained, completely out of the blue. I'd kind of forgotten that Bloodstained was even a thing, and I was like, no, I haven't, but if I can find the time, I'll see what I can do about that. Not as a commission or anything like that, just, well, I could probably have a look at it. So I did what anyone with a critique should do. I did something about it. I said, I don't like Bloodstained's in-game map. It's too blue, it's too horizontal. What could I, as a creator of maps, do to fix that, to fix the readability of Bloodstained's map? And thus my Bloodstained in the style of Blasphemous map, which essentially squishes the horizontal width of the map and makes everything squarer. Now, the obvious problem here is that this makes a massive mismatch between the in-game map and my version, which could make it harder to read. But I also did think about this, and I spent a lot of time and doing a load of quality of life things to make it better. So I color coded the areas, I put in all the watery sections, quests and items and doorways and all the kind of things I normally cram onto my maps. They are all there because I find they make maps easier to read, which the Bloodstained map originally was not. The style of Blasphemous 2's map and icons lends itself pretty well to Bloodstained, but I know that it's not for everybody, and that's fine. I'm sure that should I ever play Bloodstained again, I at least will be using my own version of the map, and that's arguably enough for me. That's why I started mapping games in the first place, because I get lost easily and I like to know and see how things fit together. It's not about being efficient or anything like that, it's just being able to remember where things are that I want to prioritize. And that's what my Ritual of the Night map does. It will help me out in the future, even if it helps exactly 0 other people. It was worth it purely for that alone. Bloodstained's still a reasonable game. It's not as good as Symphony of the Night, in my opinion. Its 2.5D graphics have got issues. The Twin Dragons Tower is a mess of an area for map purposes, but it's all right. So if you like Symphony, chances are you'll like Bloodstained. It's got the same DNA. I think they should have gone for pixel art, but you know, what do I know? I'm not a game designer, I just make maps. On the subject of making maps, which is what this video is about, September the 11th, I released my big collector's edition composite map for Ender Lilies. I didn't play Ender Lilies at all this year. Didn't play it for doing this map or anything, but I had the time and the inclination to do something that I'd kind of been thinking about for a while, but literally couldn't due to a lack of PC power. I'd originally planned to take all of those composite maps that I did for the Steam guide a couple of years ago and put them all together in one really big graphic that was laid out the same way as the kind of linked rooms that the in-game map does, the in-game map that a lot of people don't like. I was going to lay out every single room that I'd taken screenshots of, lay them out like that, and then add back in all of the annotations that I'd done on my in-game map style map into one essentially ridiculously huge graphic. This composite collector's edition map is basically useless for anything outside of printing out on a massive canvas for your wall. But in terms of me finding out how far I can push my PC, it was actually really useful. There were a load of things that I found out, for example, about JPEGs that I didn't know until I put this map together. Did you know that there's actually a maximum size in terms of pixels that you can have for a JPEG? I didn't until I tried to actually save this as a JPEG and realizing, oh, it literally can't save it at full size. And there's no point shrinking it because the whole point of this map was I wanted it to be, high resolution. So 400 megabytes, 400 meg PNG file. Anyway, I've gone massively off script here. Why was this taxing for my PC? Well, it wasn't. It was because it actually wasn't just a case of me taking the individual area maps that I've done and stitching them together, because I actually had to change a load of things around. I had to move some things because, of course, those individual area maps I'd made as individual areas. I'd never really planned for them to all go together like this, and therefore they didn't line up properly. I had to move a load of stuff around to make space, and I then needed to add in all the names and the text from that original map. And I'm not going to say it took a huge amount of time, because it didn't really. I got all the information already. It took a chunk of time because it made my computer chug, because running the big version of that file was really, really difficult for my computer to do. It is a huge, huge map. The actual file is 5.16 gigabytes. That's how big the raw PSD is. So over 5 gig. That is, isn't that more than the game? I think that's actually more than the game. Yes, the game itself takes up 1.22 gigabytes of space on the hard drive. So the actual map of Ender Lilies, my big, massive composite map, takes up more space than the actual game by several percentage. I hadn't checked that before. That has entertained me. In terms of, was it worth doing? Yes. Only 6 people have bought a copy of it. And it is the only map that I've made that doesn't have a free version because it's 400 megabytes and I'm not hosting that and it's too big to put into Google Drive. 6 people have bought a copy of that massive map. I'm hoping that they have really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed putting it together and trying to solve those problems whilst also trying not to get too frustrated with how it made my PC chug. And I've got a fairly powerful PC with 7950X and all of that kind of jazz. So yeah, Ender Lilies, big composite. Didn't play it this year, but did spend a chunk of time putting that map together. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, 26th of September. I got a hilarious amount of flack last year when I did my tier list video because I refused to call Symphony of the Night a masterpiece. And I stand by that. In fact, having played it again this year to do my own map for it, I 100% stand by that decision. Symphony of the Night is a good game. It started a genre, yada, yada, yada. Masterpiece? No. The game balance is all over the place. The pacing in the reverse castle is meh. And after you've seen that cutscene once, after you've unlocked the reverse castle once, you never really get that impact again. You know, it's a cool gimmick. But that's the thing about gimmicks, you only get the impact from them once, really. And I've played the game too many times now for me to really be impressed by that. Yeah, the idea of it, that, oh, you've actually only played half the game, look, you've got an entire other half game to play. I'm sure that at the time Symphony came out in, was it 90s, 94, 96, 97? Mid-90s. I'm sure that was super duper cool. Super duper cool. But it's now 2023. For a few more days at least. But hey, opinions are like assholes, aren't they? And it's fine if you think Symphony of the Night is the best Metroidvania out there. You do you. I feel like you're missing out, but it's your opinion. Just like this is my opinion. And the thing about opinions is they cannot be objectively wrong, like somebody tried to argue with me earlier on in the year. As I said, I think earlier in this video, go and look up what objectively means. Anyway, I, for Symphony of the Night, chose, just like I did with Bloodstained, to bring the map up to a slightly better visual quality. That's all I wanted to do. You know, the blue and white is like, yeah, it's fine. It worked fine for Symphony when it came out. It worked fine for Bloodstained when it came out, but it's not the easiest to navigate map. So, just like I did for Blasphemous 2 and Bloodstained, I put together my own version of the Symphony of the Night map with the colours, with the doors, with all of the things that you'd expect from one of my maps, all the little tweaks that I need to do to make a game's map work for the specific game as opposed to just using a generic set of icons. I went all out on the Symphony of the map, and I also know that a load of people really like the OG colours. So I actually made 2 versions of the Symphony map. If you want the version where everything is got the original colours, save rooms, warp rooms, blue everything else, there's actually a version of that available for free in the Google Drive, or there's a paid version in the shop at high resolution. Absolutely fine. Or there's the full-on colour-coded, different areas, loads of detail version that I put together as well, and had a good time doing it, even if the game still has the same issues that I've always said it does. It's still a good game. It's still a good game, but masterpiece? No, it's a very pretty game. It's got amazing pixel art. It's got a great soundtrack, even if a good chunk of it doesn't really fit. Smooth jazz down in the caverns, for example. It's like, why? Well, obviously it's got, it's got Bloody Tears. It's got Vampire Killer. I love Castlevania music. I'm a big fan of the series, but just because I refuse to call Symphony of the Night a masterpiece, a lot of people just immediately discount my opinion on Metroidvania. It's like, okay, fine, you do you. Moving on. 2 days after I finished the Symphony map, Ghost Song released a DLC. And I went back and added bits from that game update to my Ghost Song map. There's a couple of areas. There's Tollow Underfoot and there's the expansion to Sapstone. It wasn't hugely time consuming to do, though it did require me to try and remember how I'd done the map changes and clean up in the first place, which took a while because I couldn't remember what I'd done. I did not play through the whole game again, so I've no idea if other things got moved around. Nobody's emailed me to complain, and believe me, people do email me with mistakes I've made all the time. I am actually, as it turns out, a human being and not some kind of map making AI robots. Although I kind of feel like maybe I'd have a better time with things if I was. But anyway, there's one thing that I know should be on my map and is not. There's an NPC called Lua, L-U-A. I believe the patch notes mentioned that, because she only shows up in one location in the original version of Ghost Song. And according to Matt, the developer, in the patch notes, she actually has a storyline now and she goes to other places. Because I haven't played through the game again in full, I have not marked on that. So it's not 100% in the sense that you're going to have every single bit of information that you need. If somebody has accurate information for where she goes so that I could quickly boot up the game and go and run through the section to find out, kind of double check things, that would be great. But otherwise she's not getting that extra information on. Sorry, we'll have to do without. I didn't enjoy the game so much that I wanted to play the entire game again. It's a story heavy game and I've completed all the story, so I don't know what her bits would really add. But the new areas, the new bosses, can't remember, they are all there. End of September, Super Metroid. Yes, Super Metroid. The Super Metroid is a game that arguably did not need a new map. There are plenty, so many maps for Super Metroid out there. Some simple, some more complicated. A lot of them are very text heavy. A lot of them have got like little letter codes and grids that you need to look up stuff on. That ain't my style. You've probably seen enough of my maps to know that I don't like text heavy maps, and I certainly don't like including keys and stuff for, oh yes, in L1 there is this and L2 is that, and so on and so forth. I just put icons and text on for what things are in the places that they are. That's just the way I do things. So I made another Blasphemous styled map, though I made a lot of color changes on this one to make it a little bit more kind of sci-fi, because I thought it would look cool, you know, silver borders and so on and so forth for it. The Super Metroid map is arguably a beginner's map for somebody who's never played the game before, for somebody who hasn't played it very much. There's a load of notes on it for how to do basic things, which, if I'm honest, were mostly for my benefit, just to remind myself, yeah, this is what you have to do in this room, because I know I'm going to play Super Metroid again at some point, even though if I don't necessarily really like the feel of the game, and I don't. That's my biggest critique about Super Metroid. I don't like the jump on it, which is why, again, it's not in the S tier, which is why, again, I got shouted at for Super Metroid is S tier or S plus and should be. It's like, nope, don't like the controls, don't like the feel of it. The actual map of Super Metroid is very straightforward, but one of the things it doesn't have is doorways. Just like in Xanthiom the Pirate's Curse, I always felt like the lack of doorways on Super Metroid's map was a weird decision. So the doorways are added in, and the color-coded doors are there as well. And believe me, that actually took a while to put together. I also put in all of the hot areas that you need the various suit for, the watery areas that you need the gravity suits to get through, the acidic areas, which you can't really do much about, and the sand trap areas. And I only put the sand trap areas in because they're slightly weird transition rooms, and I really like the pixel art in-game for that kind of sinking sand, and I kind of wanted to put that onto my map just because it looked cool. I actually think I spent more time on those overlay effects in total than I did anything else, including putting the doors on, and that took a while because obviously there weren't doors there originally, and everything had to be put together by hand anyway. I don't think I did. In fact, I'm pretty certain I didn't do a video announcing my Super Metroid map. So chances are most people don't even know it exists. So now you do. Enjoy. 2nd of October, Demajen was on a roll. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow. I made a map for Dawn of Sorrow back in 2017. I think it's still up on Game FAQs, but since I was on this little bit of a map bender, I decided to update it for 2023, which again meant remaking the whole thing from scratch and adding in a load of stuff I didn't on the original, all with the Blasphemous 2 stylus. I really like, actually, how the Dawn of Sorrow map came out. I didn't actually play the game again to put it together. I played little bits of it because I needed some sprites, but I didn't play the whole game again. I used my map to advance things and an old playthrough that I did back on Twitch, which I used. I don't think that's actually available on the channel. I don't think it's public. It might be, I don't know, but I used bits of that as well just to update it, just to make it useful. All of the normal trappings of one of my maps. Not going to take a huge amount of time to talk about this, because next up is game 23. This is going on a bit, isn't it? Oh yeah, we're up to an hour and quarter already, so this is going to be longer than last year's. Great. Kingdom Shell, 5th of October. I'm going to preface this with a disclaimer. There is nothing wrong in any way, shape or form with Kingdom Shell's in-game map. It is great. I have no critique of it whatsoever. The only reason that I didn't actually use the in-game map style for my map was because when I enlarged the in-game map to the kind of scale that I work at, the much thicker borders of the in-game map actually made things look really messy. It gave me very little room to work with, so instead I remade the map using the Blasphemous 2 graphic style that I've been using for several other games this year, but keeping as much of the original kind of flavour and feel as I could, purely because it allowed me to fit more things in at a cleaner resolution. Again, there's nothing wrong with Kingdom Shell's map. This wasn't me saying, oh, I could do better than that. Absolutely not. In-game map, absolutely fine. Just not great for actually making a map guide with the way I do things. It's a me thing, not a game thing. In terms of the game itself, I actually wasn't a fan of it to start with. There was something about the difficulty curve, the lack of healing towards the start, the kind of melee range that we had that just felt off. It just wasn't quite fun. But the dev was very responsive to critique and very quickly tweaked several things towards the start of the game that made the journey much more enjoyable without destroying the game balance completely. Kingdom Shell is now a well-made experience. I mean, it was a well-made experience before, don't get me wrong, but it's a much better experience for me now at the end of 2023 than it was at the start. It's a well-made experience. It's got some retro vibes around it that I really enjoyed. There's some reasonably complex level design in places. There's some absolutely gorgeous pixel art, which actually got better and better and more elaborate and interesting as you get through to the later areas of the game, that I really appreciated as well. I feel like maybe I was quite harsh on Kingdom Shell when it came out, and I always feel bad about being harsh because I don't like hurting people's feelings, especially solo or small team indie devs. But maybe I'm just an asshole, I don't know. But I have no problems right now recommending Kingdom Shell for anybody who wants to play a well-executed, kind of traditional Metroidvania experience. It's definitely worth your time now. Also arguably worth your time is Goo Keeper. But Goo Keeper is a very indie experience made by a duo team who love Super Metroid, and that is absolutely clear throughout many design elements of their game. I've actually spoken, I've had a chat with the devs, and I know that they've learned a lot from the experience of putting this game together. I'm really interested to see how they iterate and maybe innovate on the Super Metroid formula going forward, because it is a game that sticks reasonably close to the original formula of Super Metroid, from the arm cannon, the morph ball style thing, the spin attack and screw attack rather, and so on and so forth. It's very, very obvious with some tweaks, with some quality of life, with some humor, with some some slight changes to the formula, but it's not going to blow you away, Goo Keeper. It's not going to take you very long to complete, but equally, it definitely isn't like cheap rubbish that plays or controls like ass, which I know a lot of kind of learning experience Metroidvanias sometimes do. It's a fun game. It's got some quirks, it's got some humor, and I enjoyed my time with it. It's got a surprising amount of map to explore, and there were a couple of secrets actually that took me a good chunk of time to find. They were well hidden. It didn't take me very long to map the game out once I'd finished everything. You know, the in-game map is good. The icons are nice and clear. I didn't need to do a lot to throw a map together for Goo Keeper. It's not my best work, but it's got everything on that you want. I'm looking forward to seeing what the devs do with their next game. Getting towards the end of the year now, and we're starting in November off with Ebenezer and the Invisible World. This is a game that got a lot of criticism. I do mean criticism, I don't mean critique. I mean a lot of criticism during the October Next Fest when the demo was released. Apparently, I don't know, I didn't see any of this actually. It missed me. There were a couple of people that were speaking to me about, well, did you not read the critiques? Like, no, I didn't, because I don't really pay attention to a lot of people on the internet. I play something for myself and then I make up my own mind whether I like it or not. So I don't need to listen to other people telling me that something is bad or good. There were a couple of things based on the demo that I thought, you know, they could be tweaked. You know, availability of healing items, maybe an extra save room in the center of the London map, but I didn't see any of the issues that I was later told that other people were having. I actually got to play Ebenezer and the Invisible World early. I played it before release. I had a pre-release version of it, and I had a good romp through a lot of the game's areas. There weren't many things that, again, blow your socks off. Most of what is presented is, however, well done. I like the hand animation, I like the music, I like the story, apart from a couple of grammatical errors. The narrative felt like a decent successor to the Dickens novella, from which it draws its inspiration. But if you aren't a fan of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, the story isn't likely to grab you. But of course, I'm an English teacher. As I've mentioned multiple times before, I have taught A Christmas Carol half a dozen times over the course of my career. So I know I enjoy the premise and the message of A Christmas Carol. And it was nice to see that message, the morality play, arguably leanings of A Christmas Carol, were brought forwards into this new narrative. The actual map of A Christmas Carol, the actual map of An Invisible World works fine. It's got that kind of linked room style of map design that Lilies also used, and whilst generally that's my least favourite style of Metroidvania map, it works well enough here. There's plenty of things to backtrack to. Getting around was reasonably straightforward by about the halfway point of the game. It's a good but not great Metroidvania experience for both playing and mapping. I'm interested to see what they're going to do with the kind of DLC and stuff of it, but I had a good time with Ebenezer and the Invisible World. It's not Hollow Knight, it's not Super Metroid, it's not Grime, but it's an enjoyable game experience. And again, it's not super expensive. And there have been some patches and things to improve the quality of life as such. But yeah, it's all right, is Ebenezer and the Invisible World. The big game, though, for November, for me at least, was The Last Faith, which came out on the 15th of November, a game that I Kickstarter backed. And I Kickstarter backed it for a couple of reasons, really. A, because it's a Metroidvania, and I kind of like those, but also because I've made no secret of my love for Bloodborne, From Software's cosmic horror, gothic-inspired Souls game. And The Last Faith wears its Bloodborne inspiration on its sleeve. The Next Fest demo, I had a few issues with the boss, but nothing super horrendously game-breakingly, oh god, I'm no longer looking forward to this. I did figure that a lot of people would take issues with the kind of Bloodborne-inspired healing system, and yeah, I was right, but then I don't like that system much in Bloodborne either. What I was, however, very pleased with was the actual end results. I think some of the feedback that was given was taken on board. There weren't really many bosses I actually struggled with. There was just the burning apostle or whatever, apostate or whatever it was. And that was the only one I really had any problems with. And the actual Metroidvania exploration was, in my opinion, really well done. The design of the in-game map was a weird one. The kind of rooms looked like they were blown apart in like an instruction diagram, which I thought was a kind of odd choice. Maybe it was too difficult to line them up. I don't know. But when I put my map together, that's exactly what I did. I joined them all up and removed the seams in a way that hopefully made the game space look a little bit more congruous. I also marked on death pits and stuff, something that the devs themselves have now gone back and added to the maps because people complained that they couldn't tell whether a pit was death or not. I released my playthrough of The Last Faith so you can see how I got on with it on the channel. The Last Faith is also clearly the kind of game that people need a guide for, as it is my second most popular guide this year. Way behind Afterimage, admittedly, but then I've already talked about how much of a huge game that was. More importantly, however, it is a map that I had immense fun mapping out. I loved the game, but I really enjoyed making the map. And there's something about trying to map out Souls-like games that I find really, really enjoyable. This gave me kind of similar vibes to when I did Grimes map for the first time, and, you know, all the subsequent big DLC changes and zone additions and stuff like that. Just finding the things that are kind of tucked away and hidden away behind breakable walls or and over and wombling free, and I really enjoyed that. And it was also during the making of the Last Faith map where I started to realise that the Blasphemous 2 style icons that I'd been using for a while were actually becoming a bit of a hindrance in certain types of maps with a wide variety of different kind of item categories. And it was here that I started experimenting a bit more with Photoshop to figure out how I could create things that would stand out, icons that were visually distinctive, that for very certain things that I knew people were going to want to look for. You know, the blueprints for the weapons upgrades, for example, or the unborn children, the things that were quite difficult to find, and that on a map when a lot of the icons look quite similar, that people would struggle to find on my map when they're hunting for the last thing of that type. They might already be frustrated with finding child number 19 out of 20 and child number 20 out of 20. And like they're trying to find an icon on my map, but they all look kind of similar. So I experimented with finding different ways to create icons that would stand out for people to find, and I'd iterate on that actually in the next couple of maps as well, which I'll talk about in a second. I've not heard, touch wood, any negative feedback or even constructive critique about these choices that I've made, so I'm hoping they were the right call. But do please let me know in the comments below or DM me on Coffee or on Twitter if you have any suggestions moving forwards about things that I can do to make certain bits and pieces look and stand out more. I know that there are some types of people that would just prefer me to remove a load of stuff off my maps. That's not going to happen. But if I can make certain things stand out that people are asking for, then I will try and do so. We're to the final stretch. End of November, TEVI. Oh boy, I have thoughts. TEVI is a perfectly serviceable game. It's got some good writing in places, it's got some decent systems in place to facilitate Metroidvania gameplay, but the game itself is just kind of bleh. I've tried a few times to articulate why I didn't enjoy TEVI, but it boils down to two things, I think. Combat was boring, and traversal was a bit of a slog and an inconvenience. Let's tackle that bit first, as that's the one thing that bogs stuff down the most for me. The game is built without one simple key component of a lot of modern Metroidvania games, the drop-through platform or the drop-down platform, the platform that you can press down and jump on to fall through. And this means that there are many, many times in the game where you have to go in a big loop to get to where you want to go, because there's no way of getting back to where you've just been if you realise you don't want to go that way yet. And a handful of times in the game I can put up with that. But I don't know, this is a big world. And if it's a fundamental design for the entire game world, I can't enjoy it. And instead I find I have to endure rather than enjoy the looping around. It becomes tedious, and you have to fight the same enemies again and again and again, which brings us to the combat, which I can boil down to pitiful damage against spongy enemies, many of which are repeated over and over again all over the world, but whatever, I don't really care about that. Combat is spammy, button mashy. I don't want to say rubbish. It's not rubbish. I think that technically speaking, there's a lot of very good ideas here, but it's boring. The combat is supposedly complemented by the sigil system, which is it's essentially Hollow Knight's charm system by way of Path of Exile's horrendously bloated passive grid. The sigils each change a tiny value or working of one very specific thing in combat, and you can equip dozens of them. And I'm sure that if you are spreadsheet inclined, you will find interesting and entertaining ways to find unique combinations of sigils that will complement each other to create exciting builds or whatever. But I stopped reading them, except, well, I stopped reading everything except the name of them just a few hours into the playthrough. It's complexity as opposed to depth. Complexity giving the illusion of depth just doesn't work for me. And spending hours in menus reading the descriptions of the 249 different sigils to find ones that combo well together just isn't what I play Metroidvanias for. I don't play it for loads of reading and menus. I play it for exploration and fun. And the sigil system, I could see what they were going for, but I would probably have cut down 250 sigils to 25 sigils and just combined a load of the effects, or just made them more interesting. Things that had a bigger and more significant impact on combats. But whatever. The map. We come to the map, which is what this video is about. The map in TEVI is very functional, but it's got some glaring issues. The biggest of which would be that you actually have to go through a door to mark the door on your map. So the connections between rooms only appear once you have used them. If you don't use them and you forget where they are, good luck ever finding them again. I believe the developers are, after a lot of feedback from players, going to do something about this, but really, and this is going to sound quite harsh, considering how many changes they've made based on community feedback / backlash, I'm honestly unsure if they really know what they're doing. So most of my playthrough, and my playthrough is never coming out on YouTube because it's not a very positive listening experience, if I'm honest. A lot of my playthrough was spent putting arrows on individual map tiles to show there was a door to come back to. As soon as I realised that this was going to be an issue, I started putting arrows on to say, there's a door here, there's a door there, remember to come back. It became increasingly tedious the more the map opened up, especially as you can only have one map marker on a specific grid square at a time. Which doesn't sound awful until you have to try and remember there's an exit to a room where you found a collectible, because collectibles are automatically marked on the map after you collect them. So if you collect a sigil, or you collect some coins, or you find a potion in a square, that supersedes anything you've already put on the map. So if there was an exit that you haven't taken on that square, but you've just found a potion there, the arrow that you put to remind yourself that there was an exit, it's gone. I made two versions of the TEVI map, and I really wish I'd stopped at one. First of all, there's the slightly enhanced version of the basic in-game map that everyone can get by the end of a 100% playthrough. Now, as I said, the game marks on everything that you collect. So if you 100% the game, you've got a 100% map, and you can screenshot that and you can send it to anybody to help them out. So the thing that I do making maps is because that's not something that most games do. Most games don't mark the things that you collect. You can mark them and then you remove the marker once you've collected the thing. TEVI doesn't work like that. So everybody has a 100% map by the time they've 100%ed the game. And I wish I'd stopped at that, but I didn't. I did my usual me thing of making a massively detailed map with everything marked on. So on the basic map, which has just got a big orange circle for sigils, I put the icon for every single sigil in the right place, the name of every single sigil in the right place. I put notes for how to get X, Y, Z, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, everything I put the locations of everything on there. I put how to get the maze. I put the locations of important NPCs. I put all the key items on. And it was a waste of time. It took 40 plus hours. There was no need to do it. I don't know why I did it. It was very much a case of I started, so I finished. And there is another reason as well for why I hyperfixated on that. And I'm not going to go into that. Not because it's embarrassing, but because I just don't want to talk about it, frankly. Yeah, TEVI. I'm sure that TEVI will get more stuff down the line. It'll get DLC, it might get new areas, it might get new content. I did not enjoy the game enough to consider going back to it. Maybe in a few months' time, I will feel differently. But as of right now, it's like, nah, don't care enough about TEVI. Moving on. Start of December surprised me with a couple of things. First of all, we had the black and white DLC for Haak, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. But on the 11th of December, we had HunterX codenamed T. I had no idea HunterX was getting a sequel, ? But it is. I played HunterX. It was a 2.5D anime Soulsvania game, which I quite enjoyed. And the sequel is, unsurprisingly, considering how the developers seem to work, pretty much exactly the same kind of thing. There's nothing new, there's nothing innovative here. The plotting is weak, the action is decent, the areas and enemies are plentiful, there's a fair few spells and weapons to find, but it's not gonna blow you away. And it does suffer from many of the kind of negative tropes of the Souls-like and Souls-light subgenres. For example, there are weapons scattered throughout the entire game to find in chests or get from bosses or dropped from enemies, but you never really know what you're going to want to use and put all your points and stuff into it. And upgrading your weapons is actually quite expensive in this game, and the materials aren't super easy to get hold of. So yeah, it's got that issue of until you get to New Game Plus, you possibly don't know what you want to settle on. The map itself, very simple to put together. It uses the exact same system and icons from the dev's previous game, so I knew what to expect and what was get myself into, but it was a really nice palette cleanser of a map after the frustrations of TEVI. I thought it was especially important to mark rooms with watery floors on, as those were instant death. Get knocked onto a watery floor, you die until you pick up the water walking ability. Who would have thought that something so simple as essentially a flag that turns on collision for watery surfaces would make such a big difference to traversing and enjoying a game world? But it did. It was a minor thing, and it really made getting around much more fun. HunterX codename T is not going to blow anyone away, but it's got some enjoyment to be found. It's not super expensive. The map isn't super unique or anything. The story is arguably the weakest, I think, of the three games that I've now played from this dev. I think HunterX, the original, had a slightly better story, but not by much. And I think 3000th Jewel was, well, to be fair, I can't remember 3000th Jewel's story at all. Something about reincarnation and a moon and a sword. Don't know. But it's cheap. And it's playable. If you like your Soulsvanias, the difficulty spike towards the end is a bit much. You can take a look at my map video about HunterX to find out more about that. Rounding off the big Metroidvania releases of this year was Cookie Cutter, a punk Metroidvania with hyper-violent stylings. Clockwork Orange fans rejoice. Beautiful hand-drawn art and animations complement a reasonable combat system that starts off a bit meh, but gets better pretty quickly as you unlock some abilities and other weapons. But it does have a bit of a game design issue, which I've mentioned in previous videos, but I'm going to mention here just in case you haven't watched any of those. Once you've completed the tutorial, you get a key card which will allow you to go left to the Denzel factory or right to the Bloody Den. And if you go right to the Bloody Den, you are likely to spend around 45 minutes wandering around that zone where you can't actually do much, except pick up a couple of quests which send you to the Denzel factory. If it would have forced you to go left at the start into the Denzel factory, where the double jump is, where several power-ups are, I think I would have had a much better first impression of Cookie Cutter. Once I got through that initial section and gone back to the bloody den and handed in some quests and got some more bits and pieces, the middle 80% of the game was great. I had really good fun with it. Cherry, the main character, her arsenal got more interest and the story started to ramp up. Some of the humour doesn't land with me, and maybe it's trying a bit too hard in places to be a little bit edgy, but that's fine. I'm not necessarily the target audience for the story of it, but it was interesting enough, and the abilities and the puzzles were enjoyable, and the map worked pretty well to aid navigation, with the caveat that there is no ability to mark things for yourself. The game does do a reasonable job of marking important things for you, but I did still find myself trying to remember why I couldn't access an otherwise empty corridor on the map, because it doesn't mark gates, which I thought was a really odd choice, but whatever. The final 10% of the game unfortunately felt like the devs had run out of ideas for how to challenge me as a player. So there were an increasing number of rooms that were packed with instant death spikes on the floors, on the ceilings, on the walls, and enemies that would knock you back into the instant death spikes on the floors and the ceilings and the walls. You can knock enemies into them too, which is great. Instantly kills the enemies, but as I said, instantly kills you. And when some of the sections get a little bit trickier platforming wise, the controls aren't quite precise enough for the kind of precision platforming style thing that the spikes were asking of. I feel like the hitboxes for the spikes were slightly too large. I think they could have been a little bit more generous, especially at the sides. I died a couple of times to jumping up the side of a ledge which had got spikes on the top, and I still died despite the fact I didn't actually touch the spikes graphics. But again, I've given that feedback to the devs already. There's clearly more of Cookie Cutter to come. They've clearly got ideas. They've clearly got plans, because there are 3, I think, doors in game with big padlock symbols that, as far as I'm aware, you literally just can't get through right now. There's one in the tutorial area, there's one in the lagoon at the back of Theo's house, there's one up in the Golden Tower. As far as I'm aware, there is no way to get through those doors. A couple of people have asked me, it's like, I do not know. The ending / post-credit scene also clearly implies that they've got plans, narratively speaking. I don't know what they are. I don't know where they're going with them. I'm looking forward to finding out. Mapping Cookie Cutter was good fun. And obviously, I can say a little bit more about this because it's fresh in my head in comparison to the games earlier on the list. The zone graphics are bright, they're brash, just like the game itself. There's plenty of pre-existent map markers to help make my version of the map look more, congruent with the game itself, though I did resize them in comparison to the actual map in a different way to what the game does. Cookie Cutter is a zone-based game, and the world map's very simplistic, but obviously my version just shoves all the zone maps together in a big giant graphic, which does unfortunately mean there's a big empty space in the top right that I'm kind of hoping the devs stick a zone into just to make it look better. But that's just me wanting artistic balance. They don't actually need to do that. And with that, I thought that my mapping for 2023 was done. But they were all of them deceived. After breaking up for the Christmas holidays, I started getting a fair number of messages about how to do and get things in Haak, which is interesting because I don't know why suddenly, maybe it was on sale or something somewhere, but it's interesting because that's how things tend to happen for me. I tend to get questions about particular games in waves. So I get a handful of questions about Blasphemous, and then a couple of weeks later I'll get a handful of questions about Elderand or a handful of questions about Grime. It's almost like there are sales going on for these games, or people are picking them up on Game Pass, or they've seen them advertised somewhere for the first time and people are getting into them for the first time, and I just don't know these things because I already own the games, and therefore the adverts targeting them don't get to me, because why target adverts at somebody who's already got the thing that you're trying to sell? But anyway, Haak Black and White DLC. That came out earlier in December, and I think I said earlier on in this video that I started playing it when it came out. I recorded about an hour of footage for it, but then I took a break. And it isn't until now, right at the end of December, that I've actually had the time to sit down and finish it. And I was somewhat disappointed, because I was as I was starting to go through the DLC, I was kind of worried that there wasn't an actual map and that I just have to rely a little bit like the kind of Japanese samurai dream sequency style section that you have to do in Anthony Hill. There was a map graphic for that, but not an actual grid-based map like the rest of the game has. And I was a bit worried that they were going to do the same thing for this dreamscape zone for the DLC as well, and they did. There was no in-game grid-based map for this, so I did something about it. So I updated the maps for North Station and Bunker 444, which have got some slight tweaks and changes from the DLC. And I then set about looking more carefully at the DLC areas and the in-game artistic map that you're given to guide you, which doesn't do a very good job if you don't play the DLC all in one sitting. A 2-week break between starting and finishing did this area no favours. What I did in the end was use Unity Explorer and FreeCam to actually explore the game world and zoom out and take screenshots and stitch together a load of bits and pieces to create a map of the DLC that looks vaguely useful. It is possible that most people won't need this or something like this, especially if you played the DLC all in one go. And it's only a 2, maybe 3 hours if you take the Path of Pain route. But as I said, for somebody that took a 2-week break and then came back to it, it was really difficult to remember where I'd been and what I had done. I did have a couple of difficulties with stitching this thing together. Fog and water go really, really weird when you zoom out with the FreeCam in Unity Explorer. Water becomes basically opaque. Fog becomes really, really saturated. I figured out how to do something about the fog later on in the process. So some of the rooms look a little bit too pink or too blue, whereas some of the rooms that you'll probably realize do have fog in them don't have them in the later areas. I will hopefully at some point go back and do something about that. The water I wasn't able to fix. I couldn't figure out how to make the water more transparent. That's just beyond my capabilities. So as a general guide for go here, grab this in this order, and there's green arrows, green numbers rather, to show you roughly which order to go in. It works well to help guide you around if you think that the in-game kind of artistic graphic map thing that's on plaques everywhere doesn't help you. It's there, it's free, use it if you want to. That was 31 games talked about in an hour and 50-ish minutes. By the time I've edited this video down, it will be ever so slightly shorter. I played a lot of Metroidvanias and I made a lot of maps this year. Next year, we're going to be starting off with probably Parting Shade, the Grime DLC. But after that, it will be the new Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, which looks great, but seems to be kind of expensive. I don't know what else is coming out in 2024. I probably should have checked before I scripted or finished scripting this video, but let's be honest, it's quite long enough. So maybe if I can be bothered, I'll do another video about games that I'm looking forward to in 2024. For now, though, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed my fairly incongruent thoughts. I hope you have found useful my maps. If you have subscribed to my YouTube channel or liked any of my videos or left any comments, thank you very much. If you have bought anything from my coffee.com shop or provided me with a one-off donation, please be aware that you made a massive difference to my mental health this Christmas, because my back has been getting worse. I have not been able to do as much teaching work, so the extra income from those donations and those shop purchases have ensured that I could have an enjoyable Christmas with family and friends, and that means a huge amount to me. I hope you've had a entertaining and joyful festive period if you're celebrating. If Christmas is one of those times of year that you do not like, I hope you have at least been able to endure it or ignore it. And hopefully you will join me and celebrate the genre of the Metroidvania with me as we go forwards into 2024. Have a great New Year's, if, again, that is the kind of thing you celebrate, or a great early night, if that is more your cup of tea. Have a good one. Cheerio.